show you my 3 favorite poses that you can do anytime that will help loosen up your hips. So, I often have people say, "Oh, my hips are so tight," and and I sometimes feel the same. We're sitting around a little bit more often. We're a lot less active than maybe we're used to these days. So I often include these 3 postures that you're going to learn tonight in my yoga classes because the hips carry an abundance of tension, right? We often carry too much stress and tension in the hips. So it's really important to keep them stretched out. Now, tight hips not only affect the hips, right? Tight hips affect the groin area, low back, the knees. Tight hips can also result in hamstring strains and tension. So often, let's say you're a runner or you're an active person, all of a sudden you strain your hamstring. It could be because those hips are tight, and it likely is. We can also find that we get problems in the sacroiliac joint. So the sacroiliac joint is kind of lower on the back, lower in the sacrum, connects the sacrum and the ilium together. That's a very low part of the spine. And so these things can cause a lot of problems, right? Now, that's the physical side. What's interesting when we look at it from an emotional perspective, the hips can also be the result, or tight hips can be the result of holding on to buried emotions. Which is why sometimes when we are in a yoga practice or we start to stretch out the hips, you can start to feel emotion starting to rise. It could be sadness, it could be anger, it could be frustration. Sometimes that happens when we're working on the flexibility of the hips. So taking time to stretch out the hips or embracing a regular yoga practice is beneficial not only physically, but also emotionally, and probably in ways that you would have never expected. When you loosen up your hips, you will experience less pain. You will lower your risk of injury. You'll reduce stress in the body as well. And you may also feel emotionally lighter and happier. Now, before we get into these postures, I am going to start today like I do any of my yoga classes, and that is with a drop of essential oil to set the tone. Now, the scent of oils can be used to relax and energize your body and mind, depending on which scent you choose, and enhance the effectiveness of your practice. So even if you're not doing a full practice, you can still benefit from the oils. So personally, I can't imagine being on my mat without my oils to start and set the tone. So I'm going to share that with you today. So the oil that I'm going to use today is lavender oil. This is the reason why I chose lavender is most people know lavender oil. The problem is a lot of people don't like lavender oil. And the reason why a lot of people don't like lavender oil is, unfortunately, the majority of lavender on the market is cut with chemicals and garbage. So it ruins the scent of it. But when you find yourself using a certified pure therapeutic grade, a really high quality medicinal grade lavender, it's a completely different experience. So I like to use lavender to start a practice because it does help to elicit relaxation. It helps the body and the mind relax, which is really great before a stretch class. So when you're using oils, you're going to take 1 to 2 drops of oils, rub them together in your hands, and just inhale 2 to 3 times. Now the olfactory nerve is right behind this nasal passage here, and that olfactory nerve is going to send the scent directly to the brain and cause a relaxation effect. Now, other benefits of lavender include it's great for the skin and the hair, and can be used to alleviate pain from burns and bug bites when used topically. So kind of a cool oil. Okay, so now that we're relaxed, now that we're centered, now that we're ready, let's get into the poses to stretch the hips. So we are going to target 3 main muscle groups around the hips today. One is the hip flexors, which is right in the front of the hips here. Then the abductors and internal rotators. Internal rotators are really deep in the hip, and our abductors are on the sides of the hip, the outside of the hip. And we're going to target the groin or inner thigh area. So 3 poses, 3 big muscle groups to release tension. Now, the very first one we're going to do, and it's actually one of my favorites for the hip flexors, is called dragon pose. So to get into dragon, you'll start with on your hands and knees. Now, once we're here, I'm going to show you a couple of different postures for dragon, but you're going to step forward with your left leg. Now, if you can, do this with me right now because it's going to be a lot more effective. Now, the left leg is going to come forward. We can start there, left or right, doesn't matter. And you can start dragon on your knees. Now, the key to get into this posture is to tuck the pelvis under so that you're rising here. So even in this tall position, we should be able to feel the length in the front of the hips here. So we're getting right into the hip flexors right here. Now, from here, you're going to slowly start to push forward, but we want to stay in that tucked under position. The hands can just rest gently on the knee. This is called baby dragon, okay? Or let's say dragon 1. Now, if you want to take it a little bit deeper, you can take your hands to the floor, okay? So hands can come to the inside of that front foot, and it takes you a little deeper. Now, in this position though, we want to still make sure we've got that little pelvic tuck. If your hips can do it, you can also drop yourself onto your elbows. So this is a posture that's going to deeply open up the hips. And in yin yoga classes, we hold this anywhere between about 2 to 4, sometimes even 5 minutes. And when we hold a posture that long, we're not only lengthening the muscles, but we're lengthening the connective tissue around it as well. And it's the connective tissue that needs to be released, okay? So when you hold this posture, wherever it is, whether your hands are on your knees or wherever, you might feel a sense of discomfort. Now, if you're doing this with me, go ahead and switch. We're not going to hold this as long as we would in a yoga class. So step forward now with the other leg, pelvic tilt, little tuck under, and then lean into the stretch. Now, this is a stretch that a lot of people the mind starts to go when we're in a yoga class. How long are we going to hold this for? This is really uncomfortable. Why is she doing this to us? Right? So this is a great posture to practice the mind-body connection. So this one, you'll want to really breathe deeply, sending the breath into the hip flexors, and practice releasing, relaxing, and letting go. Okay? So that's the very first pose for releasing the hips. So I would suggest doing this one daily if possible, seeing if you can start at 30 seconds each side, and then see if you can build up to about 3 minutes each side. You'll notice a huge difference over time, okay? Now, we're gonna move on to the second of my favorite poses, and this is called square pose. So with square pose, you're gonna start by having let's say your bottom leg is bent, okay? Your toes are up towards your shin, and then you're gonna stack the ankles and the knees on top of each other. Now you'll notice when I'm completely stacked, I've got a bit of a space here, as most of us do, right? Because we are very tight in those hips and that external rotation. So you can either choose to stay there, you can put a block or something underneath, or a towel rolled up, or sometimes I like to say, you know what, just push the legs down, right? So you can draw the ankle a little closer to the to the bottom ankle. But the goal here is to have the shins stacked, ultimately. Now, square pose is extremely deep, okay? Now, the best way I like to start getting into this pose is set the legs up and get it to a position that you feel like you can tolerate. And then bring your hands behind you and just open the chest. Now, that's gonna allow the legs, and you'll notice if you're doing this with me, the legs are just gonna start to relax. You'll notice that the legs just start to release. The tension starts to go in them. So this is where the breath comes in. So breathe into it, let the body release. And then when it does, if you feel like you can, you're gonna sit tall and lean into the posture. Now again, when you're doing this one, set your timer. Start at 30 seconds aside. Then maybe move to a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes. And see if you can hold for 3 to 4 minutes on each side. Now, if you're doing this with me, we're not going to hold as long as we would in a yoga class. So release there. So great way to get out of here is you take your hands back again, you release. I usually suggest a little windshield wiper movements just to release the hips a little bit before heading to the other side. So you're going to set yourself up on the other side just like you did with the first side. So now the other leg is underneath. You'll start by stacking the ankles and the knees together. See how it feels. And if it feels okay, keep it there or make any adjustments that you need. Hands will then go behind you, sitting up tall. There's a great chest stretch as well if you want to add that in there. Letting the legs relax. So the goal in any of these postures, so these are more yin style postures, but the goal in these postures is to have little to no muscle tension at all. So we want to be as relaxed as possible. If you're doing this with me and you're finding you're relaxed, but you want to lean in a little bit more, you'll start to feel it in those hips. And of course, over time, you might be able to lean into it more. So let's hold for 2 more breaths. It's always good to breathe. Breathe into the pose and then relax. Okay, let's release there. Let's come into a little windshield wiper movement just to release those hips again. That always feels so good. And then from here, let's take the bottom of the feet together. Now, so the last pose we're going to go through is butterfly pose. And I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do butterfly. The first way is in cobbler's pose style. Okay, that's the bottom of the feet together. And you can do it a couple of different ways. So you can start again with your hands behind you and just focus on, allowing those knees to just fall to the side. Okay, you might, start to feel it in the inner thighs here. If you feel okay, you're going to start to come forward, maybe hands onto the feet. You can maybe even start to push your elbows in front of the shins. And if you're ready to go a little deeper, I really like popping the hands and forearms just underneath the feet. It lifts the heels up a little bit. And then from here, you can lean forward and just relax. And this also gets into the back a little bit. So like the other postures, we are looking to hold this posture for up to about 3, sometimes even 5 minutes, depending on where you're at and what the class is. I usually have people hold the poses anywhere between 1 and 3 minutes in my classes. But when you're doing this one on your own, start wherever you can. Now, there's a second option for butterfly, and that's wide angle option. Okay, so it's basically the legs out to the side. Now, I really encourage you to keep the toes coming up towards the shins. Okay, that's going to keep those legs, it's going to help you keep the legs a little straighter. Then from here, I kind of like to push the hands in and push myself forward, getting the fleshy parts back. Okay, and now from here, sitting tall. Now, if you find your pelvis is tucked under a little bit, see if you can tilt the front of the hips forward. So that's where we want to get that stretch. Now, if you find, I'm going to turn this way so you can see, but if you find that you are rounding into that spine, you want to pop up. You want to go nice and straight. Okay, so when we're in this position, once you're here, you can slowly start to lean into the stretch. Now, sometimes you'll see people want to bounce. Okay, now I'm going to encourage you not to bounce if you want to increase the length in your muscles. And the reason is when we bounce, we've got tiny little sensors. I won't get into the science of what they're called and bore you to death, but you've got little sensors in the muscles that are protecting you around the joint. And they're going to say, wait a minute, we've got something going on here. I need to tense up and protect the joint. So you're actually sometimes working against yourself if you're bouncing. Okay, so what I encourage you to do is find a position that you feel the stretch, and then maybe even back off a little bit. And from here, you can relax the toes. And then as you'll find that as you hold the stretch and you breathe into it, your body is going to start to invite you further. You're just going to almost get into that zone of, okay, yeah, I can start going a little further. And you can start to walk your hands forward, or sometimes having the hands on the legs is good as well. And what we want to make sure that we're doing is listening to the body, never pushing further than where our body wants us to go. So that's a really great thing that we learn in our yoga practice is, how far do we want to go? Let's listen to what the body is saying. So then from there, you can do a quick little windshield wiper just to release the hips and find a comfortable seated cross-legged pose. Well, there you have it. Those are my 3 favorite poses to help loosen up those hips. So everybody, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you found great value in this session today. If you did, please tag or share somebody that you think could really use this information. It'd be much appreciated. So thanks for joining me today, and namaste, everyone, and keep rocking your wellness. Take care.